Now, we're supposed to think that there's already been so much global warming that, I mean, people are dying. Animals are dying. The planet is collapsing.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing.
Now, you can't question that, of course, because that would just make you a denier, just like you can't question, whether we really are racist, because that makes you a racist. You can't question a lot of things anymore because scepticism is a dirty word. And so we've even got our own Prime Minister, a Liberal Prime Minister, saying that we should now cut our emissions to zero net by 2050 to stop all these supposed disasters. But it's a strange thing. You look at the world temperature for January as measured by satellites, which is the most reliable way of doing it, dropped to just 0.12 degrees of warming above the average of late last century. That really is close to nothing. 0.12. Now, as you saw in that graphic, it was hotter over the past 2 years. Let's not cherry pick. And the monthly records do go up and down, so I imagine it will go up again next month or maybe later in the year or whatever, who knows. So what can we really take out of this? Joining me is William Kininmonth, former head of Australia's National Climate Centre. William, lovely to talk to you again. William, that graph I showed is from one of the 4 main measurements of world temperature that we have, arguably the most accurate, from the University of Alabama at Huntsville. What did you make of it?
Well, Andrew, what you can see there is a lot of interannual variation from one year to the other. That's what we call the El Nino La Nina signal. And what we're experiencing right now is a drop into a La Nina situation, we had for the last 12 months. Now, the temperature's dropped about a bit over half a degree over the last 12 months from January 2020. But there's been a lot of variability in the impact of that. It's interesting, I looked at some of the temperature for Australia and it's dropped about more than a degree in that same time. Places like China have got very cold over the last few months, but northeastern Canada is actually warmer than normal by a significant amount. So there's a lot of variability in the climate system. But I think what I take out of it mostly is that there's as much heat in the top 5 metres of the oceans as there is in the total atmosphere. So it's the oceans which are driving our climate system. And so these changes in sea surface temperature across the Pacific, equatorial Pacific, are what is driving these interannual variations. Now, underlying that are other variations in the ocean, such as the circulations of the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. And furthermore, there's the very long-term circulations of the overturning of the circulation of about 1,000 years. So all of these have got to be built into our interpretation of these very short-term signals. So there's a lot of variability. There has been warming for the last 300 years or so out of the Little Ice Age. And it so happens that in the last 50 to 60 years, there's been an increase in carbon dioxide. But the correlation is very, very weak.
Yeah, I think I should point out, and I think I've heard you say this too, when we're talking about warming over the last 300 years, that is not all man-made. In fact, the man-made component supposedly dating from about the end of World War II. So there was a natural warming in which we're told has now been added, man is now adding our own warming. Now, is it fair to say, William, even though, as you say, as I say, the temperature does move around from month to month, year to year, there has been a warming trend in the last, particularly since 1975 to the end of that century, even though the temperature does move around, that the world is not actually warming as much as was predicted, for instance, by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Well, there's another thing about that, Andrew. You're looking at a global figure, which, as you say, it hasn't been very much. It's probably been at a rate of about 1.3, 1.4 degrees centigrade per century. But across the globe, there's been quite significant variations. Over the South Pole, in the last 40 years, there's been almost no change at all. Over the Arctic, there has been significantly more warming, mainly in the wintertime. So the global figure that you showed is hiding a lot of variability within the climate system itself. Now, we can't explain those things by our computer models and so forth because it's carbon dioxide is sort of well mixed through the atmosphere. There are other things going on which we must be looking to see and try and further understand why is climate changing.
And just finally, William Kininmonth, what should we be doing about global warming given these uncertainties, given that the world isn't warming quite as fast as expected?
Well, I think we should take heed of what's happened in the past. There's been these sort of century and longer sort of timescale variations in temperature. We've had a very cold period after the Roman warm period. There's been another little ice age period. We've had 300 years of warming. If we look at the past, we should be looking to, in the future, not very far away, at a reversal of that trend. People say that carbon dioxide is the cause. We've got to cut back on emissions. But then I think the Prime Minister has said we've got to have a pathway to do that. And there's no economically manageable pathway that doesn't have enormous impact on the environment and on our livelihoods. So we've got to be very careful as to what we do.
And I should add too that if you're right and at some stage we're due for another cooling trend, then we'll know what it really is to have a climate change that's damaging, because a cooler planet is a less healthy planet for humanity. But William Kininmonth, it's always good to catch up with you. I really appreciate the time you've taken here.
You're welcome, Andrew.